I slammed the brakes and saw a heavy iron chain cinched tight around my grandfather's tractor wheel. Metal grinding against metal in the Christmas night like a cold sentence being carried out. 3 men in black jackets turned toward me, headlights blasting straight into my face, and a dry voice barked, "Step out of the vehicle. You're interfering with a seizure order." Snow hammered the windshield like handfuls of salt thrown straight into my eyes. I had driven 10 straight hours through a storm from the capital back to Hollow Creek, Vermont, to bury my grandfather and deal with the hospital-scented paperwork still spread across his kitchen table. I thought I would be facing memories. Instead, I was facing chains. "A court-ordered seizure?" I asked, keeping my voice low, forcing my breathing steady. One of them stepped forward and shoved a stack of papers at me. I snatched them. Dense print, an unfamiliar stamp, no judge's name, no court date, just an HOA violation notice, signed by someone I had never met. I looked up. "This isn't a court order." He smirked, the smile of someone used to bullying people when they're weakest. "The farm has been found in violation of community standards. The property is being seized today." He stressed the word today, as if Christmas were just another workday. I thought of my grandfather, Raymond Hartman, who planted the first Christmas trees on this land back in the 1960s, when this place was still mud and forest. He had died 3 months ago, his heart finally giving out after endless nights of gasping breaths and medical bills stacked like bricks. The wind screamed through the valley, carrying the diesel stench from the tow truck. Anger surged up, hot and bitter. "You're chaining up a dead man's legacy on Christmas night," I said slowly, each word falling into the snow. "You picked the wrong day." Another laugh snapped through the air, sharp and short. "We're just following procedure." He raised his hand. The other 2 stepped forward, hands already resting on their cuffs. In that moment, I realized they didn't see me as a threat at all. A jacket dusted with snow, dark circles under tired eyes, a man who came back too late to reclaim the past. The perfect HOA stories victim people like to laugh about online. I stepped back half a pace, pulled out my phone, and started recording. "Your names, your license plates," I said quickly. The lead guard frowned, irritated. "Turn that off. You're interfering." A white SUV slid through the gate, its tires crushing the thin layer of snow. The window rolled down. A woman sat inside, wearing a cream-colored coat, her hair neatly tied back, her eyes cold and calculating. She studied the scene like inventory being checked. When she stepped out, her heels struck the ice in steady, deliberate beats, authority in every step. "My name is Celeste Waverly," she said, her voice sweet like honey diluted with ice. "President of the Waverly Ridge Community Authority." A Karen in the purest sense, sharpened by law and money. She handed me a thick folder. "You have 48 hours to pay all outstanding fines in full. If not, the seizure process will continue." I flipped through it fast. Aerial photos. Grass measured with rulers. The barn circled in red. Total fines, $53,600. I let out a short, hoarse laugh. "This farm existed long before your development did." Celeste tilted her head. "Community standards evolve." She glanced at the tractor. "If you're experiencing financial difficulty, we have investors ready to purchase the property at a fair price." Fair. A soft word hiding a blade. I looked around. The guards stared at me with open contempt. They thought I had nothing left but memories and debt. They didn't know that by day, I followed dirty money, shell companies, people who hid behind paperwork. They didn't know I had spent 15 years doing one thing, staring straight at crimes dressed up as legal procedures. I handed the folder back to Celeste. "You picked the wrong family," I said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear. The wind fell silent for a brief second. Her eyes flickered, just for a moment, then smoothed back into calm. The tow truck engine roared again. I slipped my phone into my pocket and stepped into the glare of the headlights. "My name is Miles Hartman," I said, my voice steady. "And I'm not leaving." One of the men laughed, Who do you think you are? I looked him straight in the eye. On Christmas night in Hollow Creek, surrounded by snow and iron chains, I let my real identity slide into the open, like a blade pulled from its sheath. I'm an FBI agent. 48 hours. Celeste Waverly said it the way someone reads a train schedule, then gestured for the tow truck to keep tightening the chain. The sound of metal grinding into the tractor wheel cut sharp and clean, slicing straight through my memory. That old John Deere once pulled me in circles around the farm when I was a kid. My hands clamped to the steering wheel, laughing until I ran out of breath. Now it was being treated like abandoned scrap. I stared at the links of the chain, a flash of helplessness rising up. Brief, but real. Then crushed by something far more familiar. Focus. Cold. No emotion. Celeste stood in front of me. Posture straight, shoulders slightly back. The stance of someone used to being obeyed. She opened the folder and flipped through the pages, her voice flat and methodical, like she was reading charges in a courtroom. Grass exceeding aesthetic limits. Unpermitted auxiliary structures. Wooden signage negatively impacting neighborhood property values. Unauthorized commercial activity. Each item landed like a small blade. Total assessed fines amount to $53,600. One of the three guards let out a quiet snort. I saw the way they looked at me. A guy back from the city. Worn jacket. Tired eyes. A grandson who couldn't hold on to his family's land. In their minds, I had already lost. I took a long breath. The cold air burned as it filled my lungs. This farm has been selling Christmas trees since before your development existed, I said. Before you ever thought about posting community standard signs. Celeste smiled. A perfectly trained Karen smile, precise and measured. Standards change over time, Mr. Hartman. We have a responsibility to protect the investments of our residents. She closed the folder, the motion final, like sealing a coffin. If payment is financially challenging, we do have support options. Options. I had heard that word in countless cases. It always came attached to a price far below real value. What investors? I asked. Celeste tilted her head, gazing out over the snow-covered valley. A group interested in sustainable development. They are prepared to purchase the land so you can be relieved of this burden. She turned back to me, her eyes sharper now. 20 cents on $1 is a generous offer for a distressed asset. 20 cents. 60 years of work. 3 generations. I thought of my grandfather, Raymond. Winter mornings when he woke before dawn, hands shaking as he still tied Christmas trees to customers' car roofs. I remembered the smell of pine sap soaked into his coat, the gentle smile he wore while kids picked out the perfect tree. That wooden house had once been full of voices and laughter. Then illness came, late-night phone calls, stacks of bills, trembling signatures on loan papers. He held on to this land until his final breath. I looked up. Celeste was watching me, waiting for the collapse. She expected bargaining, pleading, a signature that would end everything. What legal authority do you have to seize this property? I asked calmly. Celeste did not hesitate. Emergency Community Protection Authority, she recited. When a property is neglected and threatens neighborhood values, we are authorized to act swiftly. I nodded slowly. In my mind, the pieces began to lock together. Speed, timing, Christmas night. No court, no judge, just internal paperwork and their people. This was not management. This was predation. A strong gust of wind swept across the yard, blowing loose snow off the barn roof. Celeste frowned slightly, as if the cold had finally reached her. I caught that tiny moment, a hairline crack. I knew that feeling well. The feeling of someone who believes they control everything, yet still needs to see fear in the victim's eyes. I'll need time to review this, I said. All 3 guards laughed at once. Celeste raised a hand and silenced them. You have 48 hours. She looked straight at me. After that, the equipment leaves. Then the land. She turned on her heel and walked back toward the SUV. The door shut with a hard click. The engine started. Red taillights burned against the snow. I stood alone in the yard, facing the chained tractor. In the rare quiet, I placed my hand on the frozen metal. "Not yet," I whispered, unsure who I was speaking to. Maybe to him, maybe to myself. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang, announcing Christmas night. Celeste and her people thought they had just marked another piece of land on a list. They did not realize they had just awakened an instinct that had been dormant for far too long. They saw a tired grandson. They did not see the power behind the silence, and I let them keep underestimating me, because that was always their biggest mistake. Christmas morning began with furious knocking, so hard the doorframe shook as if it might tear free from its hinges. When I opened the door, the cold rushed in carrying a sharp metallic smell, and standing in front of me were three figures in spotless white protective suits, lined up shoulder to shoulder, with a man behind them holding a clipboard, his lips pressed tight like he was guarding a state secret. "County Environmental Inspector," he announced, his voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "We've received an emergency report of possible soil contamination on this property." A news van sat crooked outside the gate, its camera already aimed at the barn. The red light flicked on. Christmas in Hollow Creek had just been turned into a stage. I looked at the man calling himself an inspector. Gordon Pike. The name snapped into my mind like broken glass. I had seen him before, buried in an old file tied to falsified reports and consulting fees that were never properly explained. But now he stood upright, badge visible, speaking with practiced authority. "We received an anonymous tip about the illegal use of agricultural chemicals," Gordon continued, pointing toward my grandfather's barn as if it were the epicenter of a disaster. "An emergency assessment is required." "How urgent is this emergency?" I asked. He didn't look at me. He turned toward the camera instead. "If contamination is confirmed, cleanup costs could reach $92,000. Payment would be required within 72 hours, or the property will be sealed due to community safety concerns." The line landed perfectly. The reporter stepped closer, the microphone nearly touching my face. "How do you respond to allegations that your family farm has been poisoning the local water supply?" I saw a neighbor standing off to the side, her hand covering her mouth. Another man leaned in to whisper to his wife. Rumors were already moving faster than the wind. "First," I said slowly, "I want to see your sampling procedure." The hazmat team glanced at each other. Gordon waved his hand. "We'll handle it. You don't need to interfere." They circled the barn, waving handheld devices that beeped for the cameras, snapping photos again and again. But no one bent down to the soil. No one collected samples. No sealed bags. No chain of custody. That was the moment I knew. Celeste Waverly appeared from down the road, the white SUV stopping as if on cue. She stepped out wearing a carefully rehearsed look of concern. "This is such a shame," she said loudly enough for the microphones to catch. "The environment is a top priority for our community." I turned back inside and closed the door, shutting out the noise. At the kitchen table, I opened my laptop. Federal databases do not take holidays. I typed in Gordon Pike's name. The screen filled with familiar lines. Prior convictions. Parole status. An old case involving falsified environmental reports. My heart raced, but my mind went ice cold. I traced recent transactions. 3 days earlier, a transfer of $45,000 had landed in Gordon's account, sent by a company called Ridge Environmental Consulting. I smiled. Celeste thought she had covered her tracks. I stepped back outside and walked straight toward the camera. I have complete confidence that properly licensed, legitimate authorities will conduct any investigation using established procedures, I said, stressing every word. Gordon glanced at me, his eye twitching. The reporter turned to me. "Are you denying the possibility of contamination?" "I'm saying that any allegation requires real evidence," I replied, "and real authorities." Gordon leaned close to one of the hazmat workers and whispered urgently. They began packing up, much faster than they had arrived. I noticed that not a single soil sample was taken. Celeste moved closer to me, her sharp, sweet perfume mixing with diesel fumes. "You see," she said quietly, "environmental issues can severely reduce property value. but our investors are still willing to help. I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward her. Do you know a company called Ridge Environmental Consulting? Celeste's smile froze. I don't know what you're talking about. Really? I asked evenly. That company just transferred $45,000 to Gordon Pike, a man currently on parole for environmental fraud. Gordon stopped dead. The reporter turned sharply. The camera zoomed in on his face, drained of color. I looked straight into the lens. Hiring a convicted felon to fake an inspection is a federal crime. Celeste took a step back. In her eyes, I saw something I had seen in countless interrogation rooms. Fear. Not of losing money, but of losing control. She turned and hurried to her SUV. Phone already pressed to her ear. We have a problem, she said sharply, not bothering to hide it. The vehicle pulled away, leaving behind a yard full of footprints and uneasy stares. When the news convoy finally left, the farm fell quiet again. I stood in the yard, listening to the wind move through the young pine trees. My grandfather used to say that honest land doesn't fear being dug into. Only people with something to hide fear the light. Celeste thought this was just another intimidation tactic. She didn't realize that by dragging the media into it, she had placed herself under a spotlight she could never turn off. And I, the man they underestimated, had just opened the first door leading down into a hole far deeper than they ever imagined. My phone vibrated while I was still standing in the yard, and a single sentence was enough to freeze the air around me. Your account has been temporarily restricted for protective review. I stared at the screen, then looked across the snow-covered farm. Less than a day after the environmental inspection spectacle, they had switched tactics. Fast, aggressive, no room to breathe. That afternoon, the mailbox at the gate sagged as if it might tear loose from the wooden post. I opened it, and white envelopes spilled into my hands, cold and sharp like paper knives. Violation notices, fine assessments, retroactive charges. I carried them into the kitchen and spread them across the table. 31 sheets. Each one a new reason I supposedly owed money. Unauthorized storage structures. Outdated agricultural equipment harming community aesthetics. Unregistered commercial activity. Retroactive business fees for Christmas tree sales going back years. Added together, the total spiked like a fever. $138,000. I let out a dry laugh. Yesterday it was $53,600. This morning they added $92,000. Now they called it total debt. The math of people trying to steal always adapts to the moment. The phone rang again. A woman's voice, polite to the point of being empty. Good afternoon, Mr. Hartman. This is Laura Bennett with North Peak Recovery. We've been authorized to collect your outstanding obligations. I need legal documentation, I said. It has already been provided, she replied smoothly. We can arrange immediate payment today or initiate asset recovery procedures within 24 hours. Based on what authority? I asked. Authority granted by our client, she said, as if no further explanation was required. Please also be advised that your bank accounts have been flagged for restricted activity until this matter is resolved. She didn't need to say more. I could hear the metal in her voice. Invisible handcuffs. When the call ended, the kitchen fell into an uncomfortable silence. I sat down and opened my laptop. If they wanted to play with paperwork, I would play on my home field. North Peak Recovery, a company formed just months ago. Registered address, a rented office mailbox, in another state. Legal representative, the same name attached to a different entity. Ridge Environmental Consulting. I kept digging, layer after layer. With every click, the network became clearer. The consulting firm belonged to a small investment vehicle. That vehicle was controlled by a family trust, the Waverly Family Trust. Celeste was not just the HOA president. She was the center of an ecosystem. My phone buzzed again. A message from the local bank. Online access temporarily suspended. I opened the bank's website and searched for contact information. Then I saw the name listed under executive leadership. Daniel Rowe, bank president. The surname hit me. I remembered Laura Bennett's voice on the phone. The final piece clicked into place. They were siblings. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the smoke-stained ceiling. My grandfather used to say the most dangerous man is not the one holding a gun, but the one holding a pen. I was looking at an entire unit of pen holders, moving in perfect coordination. Outside, the snowfall thickened. I put on my coat and drove into town. Hollow Creek looked the same as ever, small and familiar. Christmas lights hung from wooden poles. I stopped in front of Caleb Dunn's repair shop. The smell of oil and warm metal usually calmed me. Today, the door was half open, the radio silent. Caleb looked at me, then glanced away. "Miles," he said, his voice low. "I can't work for you right now." "I didn't ask for anything," I replied. He exhaled slowly. "They called all my major clients, talked about liability issues, about being associated with someone under federal investigation." He stressed the word federal like it was contagious. "I've got 3 kids." I nodded. I understood that kind of pressure. As I turned to leave, my eyes caught a sheet of paper hastily pinned to the bulletin board, a color flyer, heavy stock. In the lower corner, a small mark. Most people would miss. NCR 2026. North Peak Campaign and Print. I picked it up. Federal agent, under investigation. Is your neighborhood safe? The black text looked like a bruise. They weren't just after my land. They were after my name. They wanted to isolate me from the community that raised me. As I stepped outside, snow settled on my shoulders. I stood in the middle of Hollow Creek's main street, listening to church bells echo in the distance. Celeste believed that freezing money and smearing reputations would break me. She didn't understand that this was exactly the kind of pressure that had forged me over 15 years. They were building a wall out of paper and fear. And I was already starting to see the first cracks. The first flyer appeared under my windshield wiper before the sky had fully brightened. The cold paper stuck to the glass like a curse. The words slammed straight into my eyes. Federal agent under investigation. Is your family safe? I stood there for a long moment, the flyer clenched in my hand, listening as my heartbeat slowed. This was the next move. No more fines. No more fake inspectors. Now it was fear. The cheapest weapon. The most effective one. As I drove back toward the farm, I saw them everywhere. Pinned to the bulletin board outside the post office. Slipped under neighbors' doors. Wedged into the crack of the barn entrance. Thick paper. Sharp color. Clearly, not a rush job. Someone had spent money. A lot of money. To turn me into a monster in the eyes of the very community that raised me. My phone kept ringing. Unknown numbers. Careful voices. "Miles, are you really under investigation? People are saying you've been spying on neighbors. Should we keep the kids away from the farm?" In every question I heard not malice, but confusion. And that hurt more than any accusation. By noon, an emergency meeting was called at the community center. They named it the Neighborhood Safety Committee. A harmless-sounding title, but I knew exactly what it was meant to do. When I walked in, the room fell silent for a single breath. Familiar faces avoided my eyes. Celeste Waverly sat in the front row, hands folded neatly on her lap, her expression a perfect mask of concern. "We just want transparency," she said, her voice trembling just enough. "No one here is against you, Miles. But we need to know the truth. The truth." I stood up, feeling every pair of eyes settle on me. "The truth is, I'm settling my family estate," I said. "And some people are unhappy about that." A woman stood. "But the flyers say you're under federal investigation." I looked straight at her. If I were under investigation, I wouldn't be standing here. The words dropped clean and heavy. A few heads nodded. Celeste pressed her lips together. The meeting ended without resolution. That was exactly what she wanted. Suspicion left hanging in the air. No proof required. That afternoon, I stopped by Caleb's shop again. He was under a car, hands black with grease. When he saw me, he slid out and wiped his hands on a rag. "They came back," he said before I could ask. Said, If I keep helping you, the maintenance contract for the new development gets canceled. I understand, I said. Caleb shook his head, eyes red. I hate this, but I'm trapped. As I turned to leave, my gaze drifted back to the bulletin board. A fresh flyer had been pinned up, ink still smelling new. I pulled it down and flipped it over. In the lower corner, barely noticeable, a printed mark. NCR 2026. North Peak Campaign and Print. The same system as the collection agency. The same source. That night, I sat alone in my grandfather's study. Warm yellow light washed over old bookshelves. I spread the flyers on the desk beside bills, violation notices, and transaction screenshots. When I arranged them together, the shape of what I was facing became clear. Not a rogue Karen abusing power. A machine. My phone buzzed. A message with no name. I don't agree with what they're doing. A pause. Then another line. But I'm scared. I typed back. Who is this? Alyssa. The reply came quickly. I'm on the board. They said if I speak up, my family will lose their jobs. I closed my eyes. An HOA member. Someone on the inside. A real crack. I can't promise this will be easy, I replied. But I can promise it will be done right. 3 dots appeared. Then disappeared. Finally, a message came through. I'll keep the emails. And I'll record everything. $2,000. I set the phone down and took a deep breath. Outside, the wind moved through the pine trees, making them whisper like aging witnesses. Celeste believed that by turning the community into a weapon, she could crush me. She didn't realize that community is also where truth can take root, if someone is willing to speak. I looked around the room where my grandfather once sat, recording each season by hand. I won't let them do this, I said quietly. Not as a shouted vow, but as a steady commitment. In the darkness, a network had revealed its shape, and I had just found the first person willing to pull the thread. The neighborhood safety meeting began with a few scattered claps, then sank into a heavy silence, thick like wet snow pressing down on an old roof. The moment I walked in, I knew this was not a meeting. It was a staged trial. Celeste Waverly sat in the front row, back straight, hands neatly folded on her knees. Her eyes swept the room and paused on me for a single breath, long enough to send a clear message. I was surrounded. Neighbors who used to greet me every morning now looked down, flipped through notebooks, pretended to be busy. Fear hung in the air, quiet but dense. We're here for the safety of our community, Celeste said, her voice soft but projecting. No one is accusing anyone. We simply want transparency. She turned toward me with a thin smile. Miles, could you explain why your name has appeared in several concerning reports recently? I stood. The wooden floor creaked beneath my feet. I could feel the heartbeat of the room. I'm settling my family estate, I said, and I'm being targeted by a pressure campaign aimed at that land. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Celeste raised her hand. So, you're saying all the notices, the environmental reports, and the concerns of your neighbors are fabricated? Not fabricated, I replied. Engineered. She tilted her head, almost sympathetic. That's a very serious accusation. Yes, I said, and I'm not making it lightly. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a stack of papers. Not copies, originals, yellowed with age. I placed them on the table in the center of the room. This is a federal agricultural land preservation agreement, signed in the 1960s. I turned the pages slowly. My family's land is classified as permanently protected agricultural property. That authority supersedes all local regulations, all HOAs, all municipal boards. The room froze. An older man squinted to read the text. A woman covered her mouth. Celeste leaned forward, just a fraction too fast. That's impossible. We reviewed the records. I don't think you reviewed them thoroughly, I said. I pulled out another envelope, handling it like a relic. And this is a letter my grandfather left. My voice dropped as I read. If you're reading this, it means they've started. A woman named Waverly wants this land for her project. She doesn't know about the federal protections. Don't let them take what our family built. A sharp intake of breath came from somewhere in the room. Celeste shot to her feet. These documents could be forged. Then what about these? I placed a thick file on the table. Emails, recorded calls, development plans for a winter resort, with my land marked in red, annotated for acquisition, through quiet coordination with local authorities. Wire transfers from shell companies to familiar names in town. Celeste took a step back. Her composure cracked. You're setting us up. I'm laying out the truth, I said. And the truth is that every violation notice sent to me from day one has violated federal law. That bead. Ad bada as a binabato as a bada. A young woman stood up at the back of the room. I recognized Alyssa. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. They told me to sign emails instructing pressure, she said. They said if I didn't, my husband would lose his job. The room erupted, overlapping questions. Heads turning toward Celeste, no longer with respect. She looked around, searching for allies, and found only faces waking up. A strange feeling washed over me. Not victory, relief. These people weren't bad. They had been frightened into silence. Celeste grabbed her purse, her hands visibly shaking. This meeting is over, she said sharply, then turned and walked out, her heels striking the floor like a retreating drumbeat. The door closed. Silence returned. But it was no longer heavy. It was thoughtful. I looked around and saw different eyes. No more suspicion. Just one shared question. What do we do next? I took a deep breath. I'm not here to divide this community, I said. I'm here to protect it. When I stepped outside, the cold wind slapped my face. But inside my chest, a small fire had just been lit. Celeste believed power lived in paperwork and fear. She forgot that when the truth is spoken out loud, even the thickest walls begin to crack. I got the call just before midnight. The voice on the other end low and urgent enough that no introduction was needed to know this had crossed beyond local lines. Miles, you just kicked a very big nest, she said. And they're panicking. I stood inside the barn. Yellow light washing over cracks in the old wooden beams. The scent of dried pine mixed with lingering machine oil. The community meeting had ended less than an hour earlier. Yet its shockwaves were already spreading through Hollow Creek. I pressed the phone closer to my ear. Nora, I need official support, I said. Not tomorrow. Now. On the other end, Nora Whitfield paused for a beat. I could hear keyboard taps, fast and precise. We've been tracking similar patterns in 3 other towns, she said. HOA collusion, shell companies, pressure through manufactured violations. You just supplied the missing piece. I looked around the barn. School meetings had been held here. Small weddings, warm Christmas seasons. They use isolation to crush families one by one, I said. I want to flip that. What are you thinking? Nora asked. I swallowed. The idea had taken shape the moment I saw awakening eyes in that meeting room. A community Christmas service. Right here at the farm. Nora let out a quiet laugh, not amused. You know they'll try to stop it. Exactly, I said. And they'll make mistakes. We ended the call with an unspoken agreement. She would push the case to the federal level and seek approval for coordinated warrants. I would handle the rest. Not with authority, with people. I called Evelyn Pratt, the retired teacher who taught me 3rd grade. Her voice was warm despite the late hour. Evelyn, can you help spread the word? I asked. A Christmas service for the whole town. She didn't ask why. She just said, Raymond would be proud. I could hear her dialing numbers immediately, faster than I expected. My next call was to Caleb. I don't need my truck fixed, I said as soon as he answered. I need lights, heat, and a few willing hands. Silence stretched on the line. Then, a heavy exhale. How many people? He asked. As many as possible. Give me 2 hours, Caleb said. I'll make the calls. After I hung up, my phone buzzed again. An unfamiliar number. This is Tessa Morales. A confident female voice said, "I hear you have a story this town doesn't want anyone to hear." I smiled. "If you want to see the truth, come to the farm on Christmas night." News traveled faster than falling snow. Messages flooded in. Families who had been fined unfairly. People who sold land in silence. People who thought they were alone. Alyssa texted, "They're holding an emergency meeting. Celeste is furious." I looked outside. The night was pitch black, but inside the barn, lights were starting to glow. Caleb and a crew arrived quietly. No noise, no show. They ran extension cords, checked beams, hung old bulbs they found in storage. Every movement was a quiet declaration. We are still here. In the middle of it all, an email appeared in my inbox. No subject, just one short sentence. "Stop now, or the consequences will be severe." I deleted it without replying. Nora called back when the clock was close to 12. "The paperwork is moving," she said. "But you need to understand, from this point on, everything you do will be watched." "I know," I replied. "They've already been watching." I ended the call and stood in the center of the barn. Rows of Christmas trees stood at different heights, their resin scent soft and familiar. I remembered my grandfather's words, "A community is not matching houses. It's people willing to stand shoulder to shoulder when they're pushed into a corner." Celeste believed her power lived in signatures and fear. She never accounted for this. When the lights turn on, when people step out of the shadows, dirty games lose their hiding places. Outside, the wind moved through the valley, carrying distant bells. Christmas was coming, and with it, a confrontation they could no longer control. The smell of fuel hit me the moment I opened the barn door, sharp and overpowering, burning my throat like I had just inhaled fire. I froze for a beat, my heart pounding, then looked down at the dark wooden floor, where wet, unnatural streaks were spreading outward. Someone had poured gasoline. Not a little. A lot. It ran along the old wooden walls, soaking deep into timber that had survived dozens of winters. One small spark, and the entire place would turn into a massive torch. And the worst part was that I knew exactly what they planned to do next. I stepped back, pulled out my phone, and opened the security camera feed. The timestamp glowed on the screen. 3 a.m. The image trembled slightly in the wind. Then a figure appeared. Tall, hood pulled low, dragging 2 large plastic containers. He moved slowly and carefully, like someone performing a rehearsed task. When he turned his face toward the camera for a brief moment, my chest sank. Brandon Waverly, Celeste's nephew. I exhaled slowly and deeply. This was no longer intimidation. This was deliberate sabotage. My phone buzzed at that exact moment, as if they were timing it. "Miles Hartman," a familiar voice said, forcing a tone of authority. "This is the state fire inspector. We've received an emergency report about serious fire hazards at your Christmas event location." Gordon Pike. He didn't even bother changing his voice. "What hazard?" I asked. "Flammable materials improperly stored," he replied quickly. "Combined with temporary electrical systems, your event poses a severe risk to public safety. We're issuing an immediate closure order. You'll need to provide your authority and current credentials," I said. A brief silence. "In emergency situations, documentation can follow," he snapped, irritation creeping into his voice. I ended the call. My hands trembled slightly, but my mind was clear. I called Nora. She understood the moment she heard my voice. "This is it," she said sharply. "Are you safe?" "For now," I replied. But they crossed the line. "Don't touch anything," Nora said. "I'm activating the process. Since this is federally protected property, this will be treated as serious sabotage." It started. I stepped outside, icy wind slapping my face, carrying the gasoline smell across the valley. Caleb and a few workers stood frozen, faces pale as I showed them the fuel-soaked wood. Evelyn arrived moments later, her hands shaking. "They were going to burn it?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Not just burn it," I said. They were going to blame us. Sirens wailed in the distance, red and blue lights cutting through the darkness. But this time, they weren't hers. 3 real fire engines pulled up to the gate, followed by a state environmental vehicle and 2 unmarked SUVs. The people who stepped out weren't performing. They were working. A woman in a heavy coat, her badge barely visible at her collar, approached me. "I'm the fire chief," she said. "This is a crime scene. You did the right thing calling." As they collected samples, sealed evidence, and documented everything, the difference was obvious. No theatrical cameras. No threats. Just procedure. Gordon Pike appeared at the far end of the road, this time with another vehicle. He opened his mouth, then stopped when he was blocked. "You're not part of this team," the fire chief said, "and you're violating the terms of your parole." Gordon froze. Sweat broke across his forehead despite the cold. Brandon never showed up. Someone had likely told him to disappear. Nora arrived as the sky began to lighten, her eyes hard as she reviewed the evidence. Fuel poured to create a fire hazard. Then a fake inspector called in to shut everything down, she said. If anyone had been inside, the consequences would have been catastrophic. "Celeste thought I'd panic," I said. "Back off." Nora looked at me. She just escalated this to the federal level. While investigators worked, my phone kept buzzing. Threatening messages. Unknown numbers. "Stop. Your family will pay." I saved every one. Each message was another brick in their case. Tessa Morales arrived with her camera, eyes wide as she took in the crime scene tape. "You said it was big," she whispered. "I didn't expect this." "Neither did I said. "But this is the truth." When the sun rose over the tree line, its light fell on the fuel-soaked barn. It was still standing, burned only in imagination, not in reality. I placed my hand on the wooden wall, cold seeping into my skin. Celeste believed that pushing everything to the extreme would secure her victory. She didn't understand that every escalation only turned the spotlight brighter on herself. Christmas was 1 day away. And now, this was no longer just a fight over land. It was a fight to protect people from those willing to burn everything down rather than give up their power. 3 black SUVs tore through the farm gate in the middle of the afternoon, tires grinding against the snow with a harsh scream that sounded like an open declaration of war. The doors flew open at the same time, and in that instant, I knew Celeste had played her final cards. County officers stepped out in heavy coats, badges glinting under rotating lights. A tall man moved to the front, a clipboard clutched tight in his hand, his voice booming like a loudspeaker. "By emergency county order, this location is required to shut down immediately due to community safety risks." Residents who had already begun gathering for the Christmas service froze. I saw Evelyn clutch her coat sleeve, Caleb standing rigid beside the barn, and Alyssa turning pale. Fear spread quickly, exactly as Celeste had planned. I stepped forward, but before I could speak, Nora Whitfield moved past me. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She held up her badge. "This is federally protected property," she said, her tone calm but sharp as a blade. "And it is currently under federal investigation." The officer scoffed. "Federal or not, community safety comes first. We have the authority." "Which authority?" Nora cut in, producing a stack of documents. "An emergency order signed by individuals currently under investigation for collusion and fraud." The air locked solid. I saw sweat bead on the officer's forehead. Behind him, several colleagues exchanged looks as their initial confidence cracked. "You are interfering with a federal investigation," Nora continued, "and if you proceed, you will be held personally accountable." A low murmur rolled through the crowd. I felt the shift. This was no longer blind fear. It was doubt. It was questions. Celeste appeared last, stepping out of the final SUV, her expensive coat stark against the muddy snow beneath her feet. She wore a confident smile, but her eyes darted. "It's unfortunate things have been taken this far," she said, her voice soft as velvet. "All we want is to protect the community." I stepped up, standing level with her. "The community doesn't need protection from a Christmas service," I said. "It needs protection from people who use power to threaten." Celeste clenched her jaw but kept smiling. "Miles, you're misunderstanding. Every decision here follows procedure." "Procedure," I repeated. "Like hiring someone to pour fuel in the barn and then calling a fake inspector?" She hesitated, just for a breath. But it was enough. Nora raised her hand, and another agent stepped forward, carrying a thick file. "Celeste Waverly," he said clearly. "We have a temporary arrest warrant related to conspiracy to commit sabotage, witness intimidation, and obstruction of justice." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Celeste stumbled back, anger flashing in her eyes. "You don't know who I am," she snapped. "I have connections." "There are no connections here," Nora said. "Only the law." Celeste turned to the county officer, searching for support. He avoided her gaze. The SUVs stood silent now, engines winding down like tamed beasts. Alyssa stepped forward, her voice trembling but steady. "You told me, if I didn't stay quiet, my family would lose everything." She looked straight at Celeste. "I'm not staying quiet anymore." Celeste looked around and realized the circle had closed. She turned, as if to retreat, but two agents were already in place. The handcuffs snapped shut, metal clicking coldly in the sudden stillness. In that moment, I felt no triumph. I looked at the people around me. Faces that had once been afraid now showed relief, mixed with disbelief. Caleb let out a long breath. Evelyn wiped her tears, and children began to laugh again when they realized no one was sending them home. A county officer approached Nora, his voice low. "We'll withdraw the emergency order." Nora nodded, wise. As the SUVs turned and pulled away, leaving tangled tire tracks in the snow, church bells rang out in the distance, clear and lingering. The Christmas service could continue. I looked at the barn, still standing after every attempt to destroy it. The lights inside were on now, warm and inviting. Celeste had underestimated not just me, but the strength of a community once fear no longer ruled it. The fight wasn't over, but in that moment, between light and white snow, I knew the balance had shifted, and this time, it had shifted toward the truth. "There's another town, same pattern. Are you available?" I looked at the barn as the lights dimmed and snow drifted softly down. I thought about other families, other pieces of land being targeted. I typed back, "When do we start?" I turned, locked the door, and stepped into the night. This fight was never just mine. It was a reminder that real power does not live in paperwork or titles, but in the courage to stand up when you are most underestimated. If you have ever faced HOA abuse, dealt with a Karen using rules as a weapon, or witnessed a story like this in real life, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to keep following stories where the truth turns the tables, like and subscribe so you do not miss the next episode. The Family Trust, the debt recovery firm, the campaign printing operation, and 3 county officials who signed today's emergency orders. She flipped open the file and scanned it quickly. Coordinated arrests will be executed tonight. The news spread through the crowd like fire catching wind. I saw faces freeze, then light up. Evelyn gripped my hand, trembling. "Raymond would be proud," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. Caleb clapped a hand on my shoulder, saying nothing, but his eyes said everything. The Christmas service began late, but when candles were finally lit inside the barn, warm light spilled outward, pushing back the cold. Children laughed. Adults sang. Carols rose into the rafters, blending with the scent of pine resin and old wood. I stood near the back, watching my community return to its true shape. Not identical houses, people standing beside one another. That night, after everyone had gone home, I stayed alone in the barn. I ran my hand along the wooden beam that had nearly been reduced to ash. My grandfather used to say that some things only prove their strength when tested. I whispered a quiet thank you to him, unsure if he could hear me. 6 months later, Hollow Creek felt different. Not because the buildings had changed, but because the air had. Celeste Waverly entered a plea agreement, facing multiple federal charges. Brandon was convicted of deliberate sabotage. The officials who once shielded them resigned or were prosecuted. The total assets seized from shell companies reached tens of millions of dollars, and more importantly, that money was returned to families who had quietly lost their land. Hartman Pines came back to life. That Christmas season, we sold out of trees earlier than expected, and the waiting list for the following year grew so long I had to add extra pages. But what I was proudest of was not the revenue. It was a small room behind the barn, where we opened a free legal support center for rural families facing HOA abuse. Evelyn handled reception. Caleb helped repair old equipment for those who could not afford replacements. Alyssa worked part-time, organizing files and answering phones, for the first time without fear. One evening, as I was locking up, my phone buzzed. A message from Nora. "There's another town, same pattern. Are you available?" I looked at the barn as the lights dimmed and snow drifted softly down. I thought about other families, other pieces of land being targeted. I typed back, "When do we start?" I turned, locked the door, and stepped into the night. This fight was never just mine. It was a reminder that real power does not live in paperwork or titles, but in the courage to stand up when you are most underestimated. If you have ever faced HOA abuse, dealt with a Karen using rules as a weapon, or witnessed a story like this in real life, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to keep following stories where the truth turns the tables, like and subscribe so you do not miss the next episode.